Joined now by TSN hockey analyst, former Vancouver Canuck, the one and only Frank Corrado. How we doing?
Okay, over here. How you guys doing? How's the city? Everyone okay? Things are. The sun came out. How we
The
doing?
sun came out 2 days later.
Sun didn't come out yesterday.
Yeah, it didn't come out yesterday.
And we get a bad rap. Look, we only riot after Stanley Cup final game 7. All right, not second round game.
Pretty strict criteria.
How riotous do you think we are?
Yeah.
So did I see pictures of establishments boarded up, or were those just photoshops?
I believe there was one or two panicky, nervous Nellies.
No, it was file footage from the previous riots that people were jokingly putting out as this is what's happening.
Man, Canucks Twitter. Hey,
now what I will say.
Yeah.
I will say is the cops were ready because we saw some patrols even on Saturday during game 6. The police were out in fuller force patrolling just to show the presence and make sure everybody.
I don't know why we're joking about it. Like it's actually quite a bizarre thing that happens. Like it shouldn't really be a laughing matter, but I guess
I think honestly people left the arena as a home game 7 loss, and we're like, sucks, but fun ride. And like, I mean, that was the overwhelming sentiment that we heard from people. They just had a lot of fun being back in the mix.
You saw the ovation, right?
Yeah. You know what's crazy? Like being out east, I heard a lot of people say, how come Vancouver fans are so happy with the way things went there? How come, they play the way they do in game 6, they play the way they do in game 7, and everyone's just like, yeah, let's just embrace it. We're happy that it happened. And I was like, well, that team hasn't really, that fan base hasn't had a lot to cheer about. And that team exceeded expectations all season long. And that was a group that if you're a fan of a team, you can be really proud of and you can really get behind. And people couldn't wrap their head around that. They're like, well, if that happened, where I am or out here, it'd be like, it'd be seen as a failure. Like that's the furthest thing from a failure what that group did all season long. It's weird, the way it's being perceived on the East Coast and on the West Coast.
Frank, did you say that conversation happened in Toronto? People were wondering why a second round loss was being applauded. I think Leafs fans would dream of a second round loss at this point.
Well, a second round like that, like the second round the Leafs had last year, they got the doors blown off them by Florida. Like this was Vancouver pushing Edmonton right to the brink. I mean, I haven't seen that in a long time.
And I think look, you have to understand the depths of despair this fan base was put through. I mean, after the Stanley Cup loss, come back, win a President's Trophy, lose in 5 games to LA, get swept the next year, then go into a deep, dark place for a number of years where, the franchise was, embarrassing to them. A lot of people disassociated with the franchise, didn't believe it was a good employer, didn't believe there were good people running it. Like it was, really, really terrible here for a long time. So, yeah, I mean, this season was absolutely a rousing success, even if it ends in game 7 and even if it ends with them squandering a 3-2 series lead. Let me ask you, Frank, now that you've had 24 hours or so to marinate on it, when you look back on this series and why the Canucks lost it, what comes to mind?
I mean, just not being able to generate offense at the right time has to be first and foremost. 15 shots in game 6, 17 shots in game 7. I know Edmonton did a lot to block shots, especially in game 7, but you have to find a way to take advantage of a goaltender who comes into a series after being pulled, who's got a lot of pressure on him. Like that should have been a golden opportunity for Vancouver to have some urgency offensively. And they were never able to muster that up. You have to give the Oilers credit because they really buttoned things offensively, and they had to, because if they didn't, the series probably would have went Vancouver's way. But that'll be my biggest takeaway is that, in the most critical of games, the offense dried up, and that is ultimately why they're not able to win in game 6 or game 7.
I was looking at Natural Statrics playoff long stats, team stats. So 16 teams on the list because we started there, of course. So the Corsi 4 is about where you'd expect for the Corsi 4 percentage, about where you'd expect for the Vancouver Canucks. They were 10th out of 16 teams. The shot attempts were a little bit lower than what you wanted to. Certainly shots on goal were a little bit lower than where you wanted. Expected goals for percentage and this plays right into Rick Tocchet's hands. 6th out of 16 teams, and amongst the teams that made it to the second round, only Colorado and Dallas are above them. They did listen to Rick Tocchet. They waited to get quality looks, and they got quality looks. They usually didn't score on those quality looks at the end of the day, but their expected goals for percentage well above the Oilers, who were 9th. Canucks were 6th. The Oilers were 9th in expected goals for percentage.
I know. And you know what? I think the timing of when those higher quality chances would be really interesting to see, because in Game 7, I mean, when did Vancouver really turn the table in Game 7 and apply all that pressure on Edmonton? Would it have been like 10 minutes left in the third period, roughly? Like,
well, if you look at the graph, it actually it was earlier than it felt like to the eye. Their graph goes straight up at the 10-minute mark of the second, to be honest.
Okay.
But the third period certainly felt more like it.
Yeah, like the third period felt like Vancouver was coming on strong, and Edmonton was sitting back. They were content to high flip pucks. But you're right. Like, I think we kind of know, or we think we know, how Tocchet wants the team to play and what their process is like offensively. It's nice to see the evidence like that. But there, I don't want to bring this back to Toronto. I hate doing this, but I'm going to, because I follow the Leafs a lot, and they have such a hard time scoring like the greasy rebound goal, and in the playoffs, it's okay every once in a while to take one of those low percentage shots, and hopefully it leads to something, leads to a rebound goal, leads to something getting batted in off a defenseman's stick. And you take a look at the way Edmonton scores in Game 7. It's Cody Ceci from the point. It's like that's the type of shot that maybe they pass up in Vancouver. That Cody Ceci takes it goes in. Bouchard was really good at getting shots through that entire series, and Zach Hyman just plants himself in front. It's not a high percentage shot. It ends up being a high percentage play because Hyman can tip it, and then your power play gets you one. Like, that's where I feel like you have to be a little nimble in the quality versus quantity chat. Yes, you want the quality, but sometimes like the kind of lower percentage outside stuff can lead to something of significance on the interior of the ice.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was on my list of questions to ask you if they fell a little too in love with their method of looking for that more quality shot. What do you think, Frank? Do you think that Tocchet and the coaching staff will adapt as better offensive players get in here, or do you still think that they're going to be a team that wants to play this same style, chip and chase, hold on a possession, wait for that quality shot, as opposed to being a little bit more throw pucks on net and see if we can get rebounds, the snarly goals, not to mention guys who can finish a little bit when they do get that quality opportunity?
I kind of see this coaching staff, after watching them together and having success for a year, they're going to do whatever the game requires. Like, I don't think they're going to be really bogged down and say, we have to be this. The structure and the schemes and the routes they're going to skate, those are all going to be there. And those kind of lead you to having that foundation that you can kind of fall back on at times when, when maybe your game doesn't feel like it's as explosive offensively as it should be. But I think they're all very and what certain teams require you to do in order to beat them. So I kind of see like it'll be a reflection on this year on how things went. Then you're going to see what do you have personnel wise coming in next year, because there could be some significant changes to the group. And if that happens, you do have to adjust and pivot in the way you play. Like, if you have guys that are really good off the rush, you can't be a dump and chase team, because you're going to stymie those guys' way of attacking. So that, I think, along with the reflection and evaluation on how things went this year, you are going to have to see, who's coming in the picture next year, and how does that group play in order to have success. Ultimately, though, I think Tocchet and his staff is going to have some say in saying, can you get us this type of player, because we want to play this type of game? And I think that's a really good thing. It's good to have that open communication and have everyone on the same page, because now everyone, it's more cohesive from top to bottom. and you really can lean on having an identity, which I think is really important any time of year.
The trouble, I think I have full faith in that their vision is a decent one, and that they know how and what kind of players would make this vision work. Question is making it happen in the salary cap era, Frank, with Oliver Ekman-Larsson's cap hit coming on and other things. Like, to me, that's the bigger problem here. I think they've got the right people in the right positions right now. The Canucks do, but how do you make it all work is another question. How do you get space with guys like Ilya Mikheyev taking up $5 million on your cap right now?
I know. And you know what? Like, one thing about Jim Rutherford is he's not afraid to be bold. Like we saw that last summer. He's willing to be bold. He's willing to change the configuration of things, but I don't know. Like, it's going to have to be a mixture of bold and creative this year in order to make it work with the players that you think you want to keep. Like Myers, Cole, Zadorov, those guys were very important to the success of that back end this year. And yes, Myers is going to take a pay cut. How much of a pay cut, that remains to be seen. Like Zadorov, it sounds like he wants every last penny. Is every last penny available to him in Vancouver? And Ian Cole it doesn't make a ton of money, but still like a very serviceable guy. And I know had his struggles against Edmonton, but his impact was mostly good all season long. And more importantly, they fit what Tocchet is looking for on the back end, the bigger, lengthier player, physical guy. And then, like, I don't know if they accounted for Dakota Joshua having the kind of season he was going to have, because if anyone got himself more of a substantial raise, it would be Dakota Joshua. It's a guy who makes under $1 million currently. And I almost wonder with him, I don't think a team is going to go crazy on the AAV with him, but maybe there's a team out there willing to say, we'll give you an extra year. We'll give you a couple extra years because, we value what you do as long as you can continue doing it. Who are guys like that? Like Nick Paul got that really long deal in Tampa. Like there's that type of player where the AAV is not going to blow you away, but their kind of negotiating thing was, all right, tack on another year. Let's throw some guaranteed money on there. So
love
it'll
Dakota
be
Joshua.
to see how they can do it.
He is 28.
Yeah.
And he's been in the league for all of 4 years. Like, this is a late bloomer, great player. But I think people have to get a little bit rooted in what to pay this player, given he's not even a half point per game player. And he's 28. Like, I don't know.
Could Podkolzin be that type of player next year if he could finish a little more? Like,
you got to take some
heavier
risks.
guy, physical. Yeah. Maybe takes another step, like, because you almost, the way things end this year doesn't necessarily mean that's the way things are going to start next year. You almost have like a progression in mind for guys. And so I see a guy like that, like he's a beefier kind of player. He's very willing to go throw the body around. If he could find some offense, it's like there's your cheaper internal replacement for a guy like that. But it's hard to bank on that happening. And that, I think that's why teams get lost in, this guy did it. We know he did it. We saw him do it. So let's pay him the money.
Does Kyle Dubas take Ilya Mikheyev at $3.5 million if the Canucks retain $1.5 million? Like, if the Canucks buy him out, they're on the hook for him for 4 more years at around $1.5 million. One spike to $2.5 million. That's too much. You can't do that. I don't think you can buy out Mikheyev. Does somebody take Mikheyev for 2 years at 3.5 if the Canucks retain?
Okay, so the only way a team, I think, is going to take Mikheyev off your hands is if a team is really slow and they just need some players to skate fast out there. Because I don't like, he's been in the league too long now, and he's shot too many pucks into pads and into chest protectors to think that he's finally going to, break through offensively. So if your team is slow, AKA, I don't think the Pittsburgh Penguins are a very fast team. I don't think the Islanders are a fast team, although they got, their own issues. Like that's what I would be looking at. Who just needs fast players to skate up and down the wing and push the pace a little bit? The other thing, with Kyle in Pittsburgh, and do you think, like, at some point, does he want to get away from bringing in ex players and try other guys? He brought in Bunting. Bunting worked well. Do you want to bring in Mikheyev just because you had him in Toronto?
It's the hockey way. It's the hockey way. It's just the way.
I know, but he did it so much here with the Sault Ste. Marie guys in Toronto. It's like everyone had a connection to Sault Ste. Marie. Like, I just wonder, at some point, do you say, all right, I'm not, we're not going to do that anymore, or we're only going to do it when we really, really believe in that player. But I don't know. It's hard. Like, it's as you saw last year. If you think you have a guy who is making too much and not contributing enough, it's hard to get rid of that player and alleviate that cap space. But I think in Vancouver's case, it really worked out for them well, because it was Garland who stuck around, it was Besser who stuck around, and both those guys had monster seasons. I don't see Mikheyev like having that, that breakthrough offensively. I wouldn't put them in the category of those two guys. I would just say, like, he's a guy who can skate really, really fast, and he's probably not going to be a finisher at any point.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it pivots on whether you have success with old players, right? Like,
yeah, you go back to the well.
McCrimmon's having success with guys he knows from the Western Hockey League. Jim Rutherford is having success for the most part with old Penguins that he's brought here. I'm not sure Dubas has had much success with old Greyhounds or now ex-Leafs, but we shall see. Frank, if I told you Philip Hronek was battling through an injury in the second half of the season, how much would that change the equation? How much would that change the outlook on the second half and playoffs that he had, and including the case to bring him back on a longer term deal?
Well, it would certainly change things. If I was negotiating that contract, I would say, sorry, like the numbers are the numbers, and it's pretty concrete. So, if you thought you were an $8 million player, and we're taking a look at what the numbers should be, I can't just use the fact that, okay, you were banged up and you were playing, so we're still going to pay you it is a little cutthroat when it comes to that type of stuff. I think Philip Hronek was outstanding for Vancouver, like for a large portion of the season. And even when he wasn't getting points, and things dried up, I still think he was playing really, really well. Now, does that make him an $8 million player? I still can't buy into him being an $8 million guy. I just can't. I know, like, as a player, you want to push for it. All that stuff is great. But I wonder now too, if you're rebuilding this blue line, because it is a little bit of a rebuilding blue line, because you have 3 UFAs and you have Hronek, who's an RFA, who's ARB eligible. Like, what are your priorities here? Is your priority Hronek, who's going to play with Hughes, and they had a lot of success together? Or is it going to be, allocating some money to keep or bring in guys who are massive and tree trunks, and it's something you really, really wanted? Like, if you could have one or the other, are you spreading it out to a few bigger guys like Zadorov, Myers, Cole? I know the money's not equal. Or are you just kind of put the $8 million towards Hronek? I kind of think, if you're giving me the option, I think the value is more in having a couple guys similar to how you had Myers, Zadorov, and Cole, that are big, that made it hard for Connor McDavid, that made it hard for the Nashville Predators. That, like, I think there's a lot of value in that, especially if you think your team is going to be in the playoffs again next season and the season after that. Like, now that's where the conversation goes. Who's helping us more in the playoffs? Every team around the league is looking for those big monster guys come trade deadline time. If you can have them in your group already, I think it helps, save some of the heavy lifting and get that done earlier.
Or do you save that money in your wallet for guys like Pesce or Montour if they happen to hit the free agency market? Does it start to take a big chunk out of those salaries if you save the H schmil that you're going to give Hronek?
Well, Montour is an interesting one, because, like, he would be getting $8 million for sure. I would have to imagine he's $8 million plus. And then Pesce's probably he's not in that category, but he's a really solid, well-rounded guy. Like, he'd be perfect to play with a guy like Quinn Hughes. He'd be perfect to play with a lot of, left-handed number one guys around the league. Like, there are going to be options for you. So I do think that's why maybe, you put your focus on the guys that really fit the identity of what you want, and see what you can fill as far as like a puck moving type who can play with Quinn Hughes. I don't know. It's obviously more complex, and these are, long meetings that they're going to have, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth and a lot of debate. Like, these are not one-sided, and you can make the case in a number of different ways for these guys. But, just going back to Matt's point about the injury, yes, the injury is, it's there, it's valid. But ultimately, if you're out there and you're playing, like that's what you're judged on. You're judged on how you play, and he's been injured a lot in the past. So
and it
that's
wasn't
also
merely a
something you have to
downtick;
take
it was
into
an
account.
outage. Like it was outage for him. It didn't just go down.
Yeah. Frankie, great stuff. We appreciate you joining us each and every week, and look forward to several more weeks here of talking about, the Canucks postmortem and the Stanley Cup playoffs. Just lastly here, West and Eastern finals are set here. Who do you like out of the Final Four?
Ooh, okay. I think I like the Dallas Stars, and I think I like the Florida Panthers. I think for the Rangers, we really haven't had to see them defend yet. It wasn't much of a challenge against Washington. Carolina, offensively challenged team. I think this will be the first real test for how well the Rangers defend. And, I think with the Oilers, it's the same old story. How's Stuart Skinner going to match up against Jake Ottinger? And can they win some matchups lower in the lineup? Which, if you take a look at Dallas's roster, even without Rope Hintz, it's pretty deep, pretty well balanced, pretty spread out. So Dallas, Florida, no state tax. Don't come at me with your financial pie charts. No state tax teams have a significant advantage. Do not at me.
Hey, everybody, if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.